Welcome to the N1 Fitness Podcast. I'm your host as always, Marcus Sadu, and today we're going to talk a bit about stress. So we hear it all the time. Stress is bad. You need to reduce your stress levels. It's killing us. It's aging us. It's making us fat. It's making us sick. And while there is some truth to all of that, the solution or the goal isn't necessarily to get your stress levels to zero, despite popular opinion. So if we completely eliminate all the stressors in our lives, we'd actually die. There's no way our species would have survived because stress is required to adapt and evolve and essentially grow as a species. So when it comes to stress, the Goldilocks principle applies perfectly. We don't want too little, we don't want too much, but we want just the right amount. So I'll give you an example. You go outside and the sun hits your skin. You get a nice tan, your body converts that energy from the sun into vitamin D via a whole bunch of chemical processes, which is fucking incredible if you actually think about it. Now you don't want to burn, right? Burning represents too much stress. You overdid it. But you also don't want to get zero sun exposure because that's a stress in itself as well. Underexposing yourself to the sun can actually lead to the exact opposite of a burn. So like chronically low vitamin D levels, etc. So we want something in between. We don't want zero sun exposure. We don't want too much sun exposure, but we want some sun exposure. That's the Goldilocks concept. So not too hot, not too cold, but just right. Now, another example would be a workout. So working out is a stress that your body adapts to over time. And the more and more you work out, the more and more you're able to do in that workout. You get stronger, you get more fit. Now, doing too much in the gym is equivalent to getting too much sun exposure and burning. So if you just overdo a workout and you're way too sore, that's the equivalent of overdoing sun exposure. And then doing too little or being completely sedentary and sitting on the couch all day would be equivalent to zero sun exposure and potentially being deficient in vitamin D. So we want to work out in that middle range. Expose ourselves to that workout stress. Our body adapts over time and we improve. We get stronger. It's actually no different than our skin getting a tan and adapting to that sun exposure and then being able to handle a little bit more time outside in the future. The scientific term for this concept is called hormesis, which is just a fancy way of saying too little isn't good, too much isn't good, but just the right amount is highly beneficial and adaptive. We could simplify this even more and use food as an example. So if we eat too much food, we know that leads to obesity and all sorts of chronic health conditions, which is too much stress, right? But eating too little can lead to being underweight and potentially being nutrient deficient or starving, which is a stress in itself as well. But being of a healthful weight and body composition is exactly where we want to be to thrive. So that middle ground. Too much food accelerates aging. Too little food accelerates aging. The right amount of food and we're good to go. Now you might be thinking, well, Marcus, that's just the physical aspect of stress. What about the mental and the emotional stressors in our lives? And I hear you. We have tons of mental and emotional stressors as well. Fortunately, the same concept applies to mental and emotional stress here. When you were in grade 5, for example, you were likely learning at a grade 5 level. But if you were technically in grade 5, but they were teaching you grade 1 concepts, your brain or your mental capacity wouldn't be stressed sufficiently. It's too easy. So there isn't enough of a mental challenge via the grade 1 material if you're at a grade 5 age and level, and it's going to stunt your mental growth because it's not stimulating enough. Now, on the contrary, if you're in grade 5 and they give you grade 10 concepts, it's too much mental stress or exposure for you to handle. And at that point, that may even cause you to shut down mentally. It's like going from not running a day in your life to all of a sudden doing a marathon. It's too much stress. It's too steep of a curve. So as you can see, being underexposed to mental stressors can stunt your growth mentally. And then being overexposed can also stunt your growth via just shutting down because it's way too hard. You have to build up to that grade 10 concept through grade 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then you're ready. But you also don't want to be underexposed or make things too easy, because then you're just going to be dull via not enough mental stimulation or stress and fall behind learning-wise. You aren't reaching your full potential. So I hope you're seeing this stress concept in a bit of a different light, because it's not good or bad. It's good and bad depending on the dose, because we want adequate amounts, not too much, not too little. So you've probably heard the phrase, the dose makes the poison, right? Think about the strongest person you know from an emotional standpoint. And I don't mean someone who doesn't cry. I wouldn't consider that strength. I'm talking about someone who has an open heart. They can endure emotional pain, experience trauma, grieve, and then get back on their feet. So this person hasn't been exposed to too much emotional stress to a point where they shut off emotionally. And they also haven't been exposed to too little emotional stress where their emotional age is like maybe 10 and their chronological age is 45, for example. They've experienced and exposed themselves to a healthy amount of emotional stress. They've adapted and come back stronger. Just like doing bicep curls in the gym, they didn't start curling the 50s on day one. They started with the 10s. They slowly built up over time via consistent workouts. And now a couple years later, they're a lot stronger and they can handle a lot more emotional weight, metaphorically speaking. Another example of an emotional stressor is romantic relationships, because romantic relationships are really hard, and the difficulty in those relationships is what has us grow, right? If it's too comfy and too easy, you're understimulated, you're understressed, and you're likely just going to feel bored. But then on the other hand, if it's too difficult, too much of an uphill battle, there's no flow, and it's just constant work and no fun, then there's too much stress in the mix, and that doesn't work either. The concept or the picture I want to paint for you guys here is that stress is not good or bad. It's both good and bad. Too little stunts our growth physically, mentally, emotionally, and so does too much. So the goal isn't to have no stress in your life, because that's just flipping the coin, and ultimately the same thing as having way too much stress in your life. So tread that line, challenge yourself physically, mentally, and emotionally, because that's what has you grow. But just don't do a cannonball into the deep end of the pool if you aren't a confident swimmer yet. I hope that makes sense. So now we get to the practical implementation part around this stress stuff. How do we increase our ability to handle stressors? Or in other words, if we're feeling like we're having a tough time managing whatever life is throwing at us, how can we make things more manageable? Because life happens, we don't always have control over the situations that pop up, of course. So this is where the power of nutrition, movement, and sleep can really work in your favor. For example, if you're not getting enough sleep, everything is going to feel more difficult than if you're getting great sleep. So a 4 out of 10 stressful situation when you're well slept may feel like a 7 out of 10 when you're underslept. So sleep is an awesome way to increase your ability to handle potential stressors. The same goes for nutrition. If you're eating super healthfully, you're going to have more energy, better sense of well-being, improved digestion, and the list goes on. And that's going to set you up for success. So you're going to have more bandwidth when you're taking really good care of yourself versus not. So if you were to imagine the most stressful period of your life coming up in the near future, so let's say in the next month, would you choose a version of yourself that was eating super healthfully, sleeping great, and moving lots? Or would you choose a version of yourself that was eating like shit, sleeping 5 or 6 hours a night, and barely getting out for a walk on a daily basis? It's a no-brainer, right? Everyone would choose the former, because we inherently know that a healthier human is a more resilient and robust human. And that version of yourself is way better equipped to handle hardship. So basically, if you want life to be more enjoyable and just a smoother experience in general, buttoning up your nutrition, movement, and sleep is an awesome strategy to do so. Now, circling back around to stress specifically, I hope that reframe makes sense. I wanted to put this podcast episode out because I think that stress is just viewed as this sort of evil, bad thing across the board. And that's just not the case necessarily. There's context involved. We want some of it. We don't want zero, but we also don't want too much. So I hope that makes sense as far as the big picture around what stress is and how it can actually be beneficial in certain situations under certain contexts when we use it to our advantage. Now, if you're interested in personalized one-on-one nutritional coaching or workout programming, you can check out the website at n1fitness.com/coaching, which is linked in the show notes below. You can also follow me on Instagram at N1Fitness, and feel free to friend me up at Marcus Sadu on Facebook as well. Be sure to hit that subscribe button on whatever podcast player you're using. I hope you found this episode useful. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I will catch you on the next one. See ya.